All right, welcome everybody. Hi, I'm Jason, Tassie Grammar. I'm here with George's cameras live.
Welcome everybody.
Sorry, I've just got a sound source running in the background here, so I might have had a bit of an echo. As you know, many of us are stuck at home at the moment. I've personally been stuck at home now for nearly 4 weeks, working from home. Probably not the best things to happen around in the world at the moment. I'd love to be out there shooting. But yeah, I think what I'd like to do tonight is really showcase some fundamentals of Lightroom, give everybody a bit of an overview of what I do in my process with Lightroom, from importing images, cataloging, keywording, all the way through to some basic edits. I'll do 3 separate images. Now I've given everybody access to the images there. If you haven't seen them, head on over to the link that you can see here, bit.ly/TG Georges, and you'll get access to my Dropbox folder with the 3 images in there. If you can download them, save them to your desktop. I'll be working with those 3 files through various stages of tonight. Hopefully everybody gets a bit of information and knowledge out of this session as well, and makes the most, I guess, of some time at home. And yeah, let's kick this off. I'll kind of guide everybody through what we're going to be doing through this. So, first steps and first stages of the workshop, we'll be doing importing images basically into Lightroom. So I'm going to give a real overview of how I import images directly into Lightroom, how I catalog, how I file. Lightroom is a great tool for asset management over the long term. So I will be starting off, I'll give a quick guide of one of my main Lightroom catalogs to begin with. And then from there, what I'll do is we'll start a new catalog, and I'll take it slowly to kind of guide everybody through the process as well. We'll be doing some keywording, rating of images, and sorting and filtering those images. Now, I won't get too much further into it. Lightroom is a very complex tool, probably one of the best tools that I've ever found for asset management, image file management, actually industry standard. So next step of the workshop, what we'll do, we'll go through. Now, at the end of each segment, I will stop. Please feel free to send me through questions on Instagram. So just send me a direct message on my Tassie Grammar account. And I will answer a couple of questions as we're going. Obviously, this isn't an interactive workshop, but I'll do my best to answer any images or any questions that come through. So step 2, I'll be guiding people through some basic exposure adjustments. Now, I really want to showcase why raw files are a big advantage when you're shooting. So I'm going to take you through how to read the histogram, show you how and a few different ways to achieve exposure and shadow recovery in particular, the difference between the exposure slider, contrast sliders, and the shadows and highlights slider. They are different for different reasons, and I'll kind of show you the advantages of each as we step through. And again, as I stop at the segment, I'll check my Instagram account for any questions that are coming through here. The next segment of the workshop, what I'll do is I'll guide you through a quick black and white edit. Now, what I really want to do with the black and white edit is show how to do, I guess, contrast adjustments, cropping of images, and creating a preset as well, or creating presets with Lightroom. Lightroom's great for creating shortcuts and kind of streamlining your workflow as you're going. I tend to find I don't use presets so much unless I'm doing a client job. Over the years, I've done food photography, all sorts of different things, and certain clients might like a certain style of images, so I tend to create presets really for that particular job, I guess, once a client is happy with the overall look and feel. As we step through again, so the last stage of the workshop, what we'll do is do a complete edit of an image. Now, for the complete edit, we'll be looking at exposure adjustments, white balance adjustments, what the clarity and texture adjustment sliders do. We'll do some color corrections, localized adjustment tools. I'll kind of showcase how to make selective edits within Lightroom. I will show a very, very quick overview of the basic integration with Photoshop. Now, this isn't a Photoshop workshop, but I tend to find Lightroom and Photoshop work really, really well together. So Photoshop's great for much more complicated edits. Lightroom is great for raw processing, but they also work really well together in terms of file and asset management as well. So that'll be the 4 steps of the workshop as we step through. As I said, each step of the way, I'll check my Instagram direct messages as well, and we'll see if we can answer any questions. So follow along with me over on Instagram as well at Tassie Grammar, and check out George's Cameras at George's Cameras as well. Just to follow along on their social media account. So what I will do here now, I'll just quickly flick on my desktop so we can have a quick look at how I use Lightroom in its, I guess its entirety, and how I've used it over the years firstly, and then we'll get into creating a new catalog and importing the images. So as you can see, and hopefully the video quality is good enough for most people to be able to see this, I will also publish this to the Project Rawcast YouTube channel later as well, so that you can go back through and check it out. But as you can see in this particular Lightroom catalog, now I'm going to start over on the left-hand side panel. So underneath the navigator window, you just see me collapsing the side of the window, which we're looking at the moment. Below that, in this particular Lightroom catalog, I've got 81,763 images. Now that's basically 2 to 3 years worth of images. So for me, the benefits in Lightroom really are about managing your entire image catalog over time. And to have 81,763 images, I really want to make my catalog as optimized as possible in terms of finding the images that I want to look for at the time. So there's a few things that I will show, and we'll demonstrate this more as I'm importing images as well. So scrolling down on the left-hand side window, you should see it moving. I've basically got each individual folder that I'm storing images in sorted by date in this particular catalog. Now, there is no right and wrong for these. It is really up to you how you do this, and I'll show you some advantages and disadvantages of each system afterwards. This particular catalog, I've got them all sorted as day, month, and year. Okay, so newer catalogs, what I am doing now is actually sorting them by event or client name. It just depends on the particular purpose of the catalog. So as I'm scrolling down here, what you'll be able to see is I've got collections. Collections are shortcuts, ways to navigate through to different images. You can see that this particular collection here that I've got selected is called Possible Website Images, and that's basically a shortcut to all of these images here. Now over on the right hand side window, we've got, so underneath the histogram, so in the very top right hand corner, you can hopefully see my mouse moving around. Down below this, we've got a list of keywords as well. And it kind of allows me, I guess, to refine and sort in different ways, just to find and locate images within my catalog. This, again, no right or wrong way to do this, but I will show you some advantages and disadvantages of doing them in particular ways a little bit later. All right, so what I'll do now is I'll just make sure everybody's got an opportunity, for anybody who's just tuned in there, to just head back over. I'll just go back to my intro slider here. Check out the URL on here. Make sure you've downloaded all 3 images in here. I recommend just saving them to your desktop for now, because these are the 3 images that I'll be working with. So head over to bit.ly/tggeorges. Just give it maybe 30 seconds just for everybody to get hold of those images. Save them to your desktop. Don't do anything else with them for now, and we'll work with them from there. All right, so what I'll do now here, I'm actually going to start a fresh catalog. So I'll basically be starting very fresh with a whole new catalog to begin with here. It's going to make it a little bit easier to navigate and to find images later. Now, so what I'm doing, I'll just start that again. So I'm going to go File, New Catalog, Now I'm just going to create a new folder. So I'm just going to call this George's Workshop for now. Create. Now I'm going to name the catalog as well, George's Workshop, April 2020. Now I've done many workshops with George's in the past as well. We've done quite a lot of workshops in a classroom. So I'm just going to call this, for the date for the moment, I'm just going to create this. Now this particular file really is going to be the catalog file. Now your catalog file, you need to think about it as a database. Basically what this file is going to do is create all of the references for every single change that you make to a file, every single file name that you import. The catalog itself does not store the files. The catalog stores the information that the files need to basically show the changes that you're looking at. So I'm just going to go back, hang on, just give me a second. I have just been told that we're still on the start screen, so just give me a second. We'll head back over to the display. I'll redo that again, so give me a sec. All right. So I'll start that section again. All right. Okay, so now that we're back here, hopefully everybody's still following along. So I'm just going to start a new catalog. Okay, so File, New Catalog. I'm just going to save it to an external drive. New folder, George's Cameras. Okay, I'm going to name the file George's Workshop April 2020. All right. So I'm just going to close that. What this will do is close my existing file, create a backup of this catalog, and then we're just going to start with a fresh catalog. Sorry about the mistake there, guys. First attempt at doing a live broadcasted workshop, so hopefully everybody's still following along. Nobody's falling asleep yet or shaking their head at me. I'm sure there's a few people out there that I know that have probably got their hands in their palms over their face at the moment. But anyway, all right, so we've got a fresh catalog here to begin with. Now, you'll see no files, no references, no anything in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to import the images that we've downloaded from the Dropbox bit.ly file or link that I sent through. So let's just start with this import. So File, Import Photos and Videos. Now I'm just going to locate the files on my desktop. Okay, so just locate the files that I've downloaded for you there before. Now, if everybody saved them to their desktop, like I said, it should be easy to find. Basically, what we've got here now is 3 files. So we're going to be working with a tree, a very, very underexposed image, and an image of Horsehead Rock, one of the classic locations down there on the south coast of New South Wales. There's a few things that's really important here when we do import images. First and foremost is at the very top of the screen here, we've got 4 options: copy as DNG, copy, move, and add. Now, I always use copy unless I'm doing something very specific. But for today, what we're going to be doing is making sure that we use copy. Now, so for copy, what we're going to be looking to do is make sure that we're actually moving the files or copying the files from the source. Now, if you can imagine putting your SD card into your computer, taking your SD card out of your camera or plugging your camera into your computer, basically what we'll then be doing is copying those files directly off the source and copying them into a specific place within your Lightroom catalog. So I'm going to start from here. We'll make sure we've got copy turned on. Now, in your destination, for me, what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to use the George's Cameras folder that I've actually started here. I'm going to go into the George's Cameras workshop. I'm going to create a folder called Images. Now, just for this particular workshop and for this occasion, I'm just going to organize all of my files into one folder. Now you should see a drop-down window or a window expanding and closing on the right-hand side window for me. So that's where the destination is. Now we're going to go back up to the very top here. Now before we import these images, what I want to do is we're going to build previews for these images. Now I'm going to build a one-to-one preview. So basically what this is going to do, previews allow you to navigate through your Lightroom catalog extremely quickly. They do take space, so that is something to think about, but they actually do take space on your hard drive to create this. But I'm going to do this specifically because for me, as your catalog gets bigger, you probably don't want to be creating one-to-one previews, but we've got a small catalog today of what's going to be 3 files basically. So I'm just going to use one-to-one previews. I am going to build a smart preview. Now below this, don't import suspected duplicates. Now this is important for me when you are importing files off an SD card. Quite often what can happen is you may end up duplicating files or images will be imported into multiple folders. Now with this actual option turned on, it's actually looking at the EXIF data of the image. It's looking at the file names as well. So what it will do is basically not import anything that it believes is a duplicate image in your catalog already. Below this, make a second copy too. Now this is, for me, I'm not going to turn this on for this particular purpose, but a good reason to have this turned on is if you're doing a client job, so if you're shooting a wedding, you're shooting food, you're shooting an event, making a second copy too will actually create a backup to a second source. So just in case you do happen to format your SD card or anything goes wrong in that process, you've actually got a second copy of those raw files stored somewhere else if you're shooting in RAW. And that's, for me, a great, opportunity just to make sure you're backing up for a client. That's probably the only reason that I actually do it. Now, below this, I'm going to tick the option that says Add to a Collection. Now, for this, a collection, as I showed in the first part when I showed my original catalog, a collection is a great way to be able to navigate to a particular set of images quite quickly. For today's use, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a collection. I'm going to call it George's Cameras, and I'm going to create. Okay, so basically we're going to be creating what could essentially be thought of as a bookmark for these images. It's going to allow me to find these later. Below this, you've got rename files. Now again, depending on your purpose, now I'm not going to rename files today. Depending on your purpose, renaming a file again could be a great way to, say, reference an event, a client job, a location. So if I went to Iceland, for example, you could rename the files to be Iceland da-di-da with unique names after it as well. So there is a good reason for doing it, but for this particular purpose, there's no need to. Below this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a few keywords. I'm just going to add again, George's. I'm just going to add workshop. That'll do for the moment. Okay, now keywords again are another way to create a bookmark or a reference to be able to locate and find images later, and I'll demonstrate that very soon. So in this particular purpose, in these steps, so we're importing the images, I'm guessing from your desktop, if that's where you've saved your images before. We're going to be copying those images to a new location. Now I've selected the destination, which is on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, of an external hard drive underneath the George's Camera folder in a folder called Images. I'm going to import them all into one folder with no date references on them for this particular purpose. So that's it. So if everybody just wants to take a quick look at that screen, hopefully everybody can see the details on it well. I'll just give it a 30 seconds just to make sure everybody's up to that, and then I'll click import and we'll start working on them. All right, okay, so I'm just going to click import. That'll now take us back to the library screen. Now I'll just let those do, and I'm just going to disable that for a second. All right, so basically now we should be in a library window. Now at the moment, by default, we've got thumbnails to set quite small. So within this library window, now I'll just go back a little bit. So we've got at the very top right-hand side, we've got library, develop, map, book, slideshow, print, and web. The only three that I ever use are library, develop, and map. I don't use book, slideshow, or print, or web at the moment. So we should be in the library window. Now in the center window, in the bottom right-hand side, you should see a little slider that says thumbnails. And that, if you drag that, that'll allow us to make our images bigger and smaller. I'm just going to make them big enough today for being able to see them all. Now, so on the left-hand side window, under Navigator, you should see, I'll just collapse and stretch that out a few times so everyone can see where I'm pointing to. Under the Navigator window, so we've got our full screen, or our preview. Down below that, we should see all photographs. So we should only have 3 photographs, or I've got 3 photographs in this catalog. Below that, the folder that everything's stored in, images, which I'll just collapse here at the moment. Below that, collections. I'm just collapsing and uncollapsing that at the moment. In the center window now, we've got our 3 images. Now, there's a few different things that I generally do here to begin with. Now, first and foremost, if you're importing a lot of images, unless you are, I'm not going to name any photographers. I could probably name a few off the top of my head, but unless you are extremely talented, you're probably going to have a lot of images that are either slightly out of focus or over or underexposed, or just images that you really want to cull, the composition's not correct, something's not right with them. So what we're looking to do generally is to go through our images and kind of look for the images that we want to actually edit. In this particular step, what I'll do, because we've only got 3 images, but I want to show how to just rate and filter images here to begin with. So when we are looking through our images, if we double click on any of the images that are in the middle, just double click and you'll be able to actually pull up a full screen view of this. Now we should still be in the library window. Now, if you've got this Melbourne image up, Melbourne, beautiful city. I'm in Sydney. Tough choice between the 2 cities, but hey. Yeah, anyway, this pretty much represents Melbourne to me sometimes, pretty moody and dark. But I've actually chosen this image for a very particular reason, and that is because it is underexposed. And I'm going to show a little bit later how shadow recovery and shooting in RAW really does make a huge difference. But what I want to do for the moment is just rate and filter some of these images. Now, if you right click on this image, you can actually see a few things here. We're just going to scroll down in the menu a little bit, and you've got flags, ratings, and color labels. So flags, ratings, and color labels are the 3 ways to really sort, filter, and cull images, I guess. Not so much cull, but at least make or select the images that you really want to work with or that you like out of a particular shoot or whatever. Now, for me personally, ratings work the best. I'm colorblind. Some people may or may not know that. I should have said that at the beginning, but look, I personally find that star ratings or number ratings work better for me than color labels. Everybody will have their own particular method of doing this. There is no right or wrong. So color labels, if I was to click on red here, so I've set the color label red, and then in the bottom right hand, I'm just going to press on my screen Command and minus for the moment just to zoom out. You see underneath the Melbourne image, you can see a little square that's appeared there, and that's a red image or red flag. So now in the lower right hand side of the screen, down near the thumbnail slider, you may or you should be able to see that there's a filter bar here which has got flags, star ratings, and colors. Now I'm going to click on red. I hope it's red. And basically we should only see one image appearing here. Now that's again a great way to really just be able to select individual images as you're working through and culling them. I personally prefer, though, I'm just going to unrate that. What I do and what I use is numbers. So the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. For me, 0 is turning off a number, but then 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are different ways that I rate my images. So if I click number 1 at the moment, set rating to 1. For me personally, what I'm doing as I'm rating these images from 1, 2, 3, 4 to 5, 1 is possible. 2, generally, as I'm working my way up closer to number 5, I typically rate my finalized images as number 5. So whenever I've got a larger catalogue, the images that are rated number 5 are generally images that I've edited and that I'm actually happy with, that I'm more likely to output or to give to somebody to a client, or something that I'm actually happy to post to Instagram, for example, which I don't do very often these days anymore. That's because I'm not out shooting. But so 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I'm just going to press 0 for a second. And now I'm just going to rate the tree, for example, number 1. Okay, now back down in the filter bar, again, underneath the thumbnail slider, you've got the star ratings. Now you've got a greater than or less than sign. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I'm just going to click on the number 1, for example. So star rating number 1, it'll bring up the tree that I've done. If I pick number 2, there'll be no images there because I haven't rated any images as number 2 yet. Okay, so if I go back to the beginning, I'm just going to remove the rating. I'm going to rate the horse head number 4. This is actually an image that I have posted to Instagram in the past. So as I scroll through my rating, I'm just selecting, again, the stars, and that'll actually bring up that image. Okay, so I've got, at the moment, an image rated as 4, so greater than. I'm just going to go rating equal to. So if you click the greater than or equal to, so nothing will appear when I click number 2. If I click number 4, it'll appear. Okay, so what we should be able to do now, I'll just bring all of the images back up. So I guess in terms of sorting through your images, that's a very quick way of doing it. And look, I won't touch too much more on that because it does get quite complicated as we're going. But I will go over to the right-hand side window here, underneath. So you should see underneath the histogram, down below, we do have some keywords here. So what I want to do here at the moment, I'm just going to bring up the horsehead rock. Now I'm going to add a keyword to this. So at the moment, I've added George's and workshop to everything. I'm just going to put a comma after it and add horse. Okay, just for the moment. So now if I go back to all of my images, I'm just going to, for me, just going to press Command and minus on mine. Now I am using a Mac. It might be Control minus on PC, but at the moment, I've got on the right-hand side window, George's, horse, and workshop are all options for keywords here. Now, if I click, I'm just going to collapse the window a little bit so everybody can see, just in case I'm not sure what resolution everyone's looking at. But we will just hover over workshop. There's a little arrow beside workshop, and just click number 3. Okay, now that will bring up all of the images that we've added the keyword to. Now, in the import process, we added those keywords. Now, if I just go up a little one for horse at the moment, I'm just going to click the arrow. That'll show me the horse. Now, I tend to use keywords more for locations. I guess that's my process, is when I'm at a particular location, whether it be Melbourne, Sydney, South Coast, New South Wales, Great Ocean Road, Cradle Mountain, whatever it is, keywords for me generally are my locations. Again, there's no right or wrong here, but that's what makes sense to me. Just like colours don't make sense to me so much, but will to other people. Numbers don't always make sense to everybody, but they do to me. There's no right or wrong here. It's just the process that I'm using. So I'm just going to click on workshop again, bring up all 3 images, and that'll basically show all of the images that are there. All right. Now, so I'm just going to bring up all of the images again. So look, that's a very, very quick overview, I guess, of how to sort through and add keywords. And as I said, I will add this particular video file to Project Rawcast afterwards, or I will do my best to add it to Project Rawcast afterwards. Yeah, all right. So what we will do here now is have a very, very quick look, I guess, at starting to do some exposure controls. So I'll just give everybody a quick little 10 seconds and I'll show what we're going to be looking at next. So, all right, now before we go too far, I'm just also going to have a look at some questions here. And, all right. Okay, I don't have any questions that have come through. Earl Blessing sent through an emoji with his face palm. That's awesome. One of the people that I would have expected to do so. But yeah, as I said before, if there are any questions, send them through. All right, so next segment. So we'll cover some basic exposure adjustments. Now really, exposure adjustments within Lightroom are best done with raw files. Okay, now another little tip that I have is that I never import JPEGs into Lightroom. I never import a compressed file into Lightroom. I never import anything else other than raw files and TIFF files. TIFF files will come back from Photoshop later, and I'll demonstrate that. But the only files that I ever have in Lightroom are raw files. Remembering Adobe Lightroom is built on Adobe Camera Raw. So that realistically is, I mean, the advantages of it are quite simply to process raw files. JPEGs, you will never get the same result with doing so. So what we're going to look at here is why I shoot in RAW to begin with, reading the histogram, shadow recovery, exposure sliders, black and white points within this. So I'll just flick back now to the display. Now the first file we are going to be working on is the Melbourne CBD image. So let's just double click on that file to begin with. Now we're going to have a look at some EXIF data here, just so we can kind of get an idea of how this was shot. Now, as I said, it is very underexposed, and anybody who may have done a post-processing workshop with me in the past has probably seen this image for this exact purpose. So I'm just going to have a look here. I'm just going to collapse the histogram window, so very top right-hand corner, just so everybody can see what I'm looking at. Now, below the histogram itself, you should see some camera settings. Okay, now these are the settings that were actually used to shoot this particular image. Now, it was shot at ISO 50, which is probably why it's so underexposed. 23mm using, we'll have a look at what lens in a sec. Shot at f16 and shot at 70 seconds. So I remember I was using a 6-stop ND right on sunset to be able to shoot this at ISO 50. Now, we'll just scroll down on the right-hand side window, and we can have a look at the EXIF data here as well. Okay, so the EXIF data contains all of the information about this particular file. So we can see it was shot 14th of August 2016, quite a long time ago. It was shot with a Canon 5D Mark III using a 16mm lens. Okay, now, as I've said a few times, it is heavily underexposed, but let's have a look and see what we can actually achieve with it. I'll just flick on a little preview here, just so everybody can kind of see. So we're starting with this particular file, which you should see pop up on the screen here, full screen. And the end result I actually have on my Instagram feed quite recently, and it is just here. So as you can see, this is a raw file. Now I'm not going to process this entire file. within this session, but I will get it to the point where we've basically got our exposure correct and showing the advantages again of why shooting in RAW is quite advantageous. So I'm just going to, let's get back to the display. All right. Now, on the top right-hand side of the screen, we have Library, Develop, Map, Book, Slideshow, Print, and Web. So let's click on Develop. Now, this is where all of the actual heavy lifting, I guess, and raw processing comes in. Now, within the Develop window, this is where the editing happens. This is where we can make all our changes, do all our color corrections, shadow recovery, exposure corrections, detail corrections, all of that sort of stuff. But what I want to do here firstly is really just show what the histogram is showing me in this particular image. Now, nearly every camera, when you're shooting live these days, you can actually see a histogram. If not live, you can at least see it after you've captured an image on the back of the screen. Some cameras, you might just need to press info a few times on them, but you can actually see all of this information. And for me, the histogram never lies. So in terms of what we're actually looking at here, the histogram on the left-hand side is shadows. Histogram on the right-hand side is highlights. And everything basically within the center part of the image is your midtones. Now, I'm just going to collapse what I'm looking at here again, just so everybody can follow along, and I'll expand it. So within this histogram, you can see that the gray part of the information is all pushed towards the left of the histogram. Now, this basically means that it is heavily underexposed. There's a lot of information that's been lost in this file, and it's actually, we're going to need to pull it out within shadows. Now, remembering this is shot with a Canon 5D Mark III, so reasonably old camera these days. But let's just have a quick look here at what we can actually achieve. Now, I'm just going to click the little arrow that's on the top left-hand side of the histogram for me, and you can actually see the parts that are completely underexposed, which apparently will have no detail in them at all. So this, you can see the blue under the bridge, all of that, all those black pixels. Now I'm just going to turn that off for a second. I can do the same on the other side, but there's no information in the highlights that are overexposed. Now, let's just have a quick look here. Firstly, I'm just going to slide the exposure slider across and have a look at what the histogram is doing. Basically, what we're now doing is evenly spreading the entire histogram more towards the highlights, okay? So every single section of the file, from shadows through to midtones through to highlights, we're now correcting the exposure. Now, I'm just going to turn that off for a second. You can do the same thing by actually sliding the histogram. So if you click on the histogram, but it's actually moving a different slider. We're moving the blacks. Now, depending on what region of the histogram you click in, will depend on what part or which slider actually moves. Now, I generally don't tend to do it that way. What I will do here, though, is I'll just show very quickly. Firstly, I'm going to hold down Alt on my keyboard, and you should see the words Reset Tone appear. Now, what I want to do is just slide blacks across. Now, on a Mac, it's Alt. I haven't used a PC for a long time, but I'm going to guess it should be the same. We're just sliding across. Now, what we're actually looking at here is a mask that gets created over the top of the image that actually shows what pixels are still underexposed. So if I hold down Alt and slide across, what we're looking to do and what we're looking to achieve here is get it to the point where no pixels are showing, but not go any further. So just slide it across. If you watch, I'll slide it in reverse, you'll be able to see basically the whole image gets underexposed except for the sky. I just want to slide it to the point now where there's no pixels showing. Now, if you have a look at the histogram itself again, you can actually see there's a slight gap there between the high peak and the actual edge of the histogram. So what we're looking to do is make sure that no pixels are touching the left-hand side of the histogram. Okay, so if I hold that down, again, Alt, and just slide the black slider across, it's done. Now we're going to do the same with the whites as well, although there's not a lot within whites, but I'm just going to hold down Alt, and I'm actually going to slide that across so we actually get a bit more exposure in the top end in the highlights. And you watch your histogram actually sliding towards the highlights. Now that is basically to the point where I would be happy for the moment and not going any further. We don't want anything within the histogram touching the right-hand side window, or right-hand side of the histogram. Now I'm going to slide our shadows slider across now, and what we should start to see is the bottom right-hand side, or bottom left-hand side of the histogram now starting to spread a little bit. So what we've done is we've now separated the blacks and got much more detail, particularly in areas like underneath the bridge here. Now, it's still going to be heavily underexposed. It was definitely not a correctly shot image, but again, what we'll be able to do is really demonstrate what raw processing will do. Now, in the highlights, there's nothing in the highlights. Because this image was really underexposed, the right-hand side of the histogram itself, and I'll just collapse the histogram here just so everybody can follow along just in case. The right-hand side of the histogram is pretty much empty because there's not much information in there at all. So I'm just going to slide the highlight slider across just to brighten up parts of the image. Now at the moment, you'll probably see, a little spike is appearing on my image here, or in my histogram. It basically means that I'm now overexposing, or actually pushing the image too far. Now, while we've got this here, if I go back up to the histogram, we've got two arrows on the histogram here, one for shadows and one for highlights. I'm going to click the highlight side of the histogram on, and you'll now see on my screen parts of the image are actually showing as red. These are now the overexposed parts of the image because I've pushed the highlight slider too far. Okay, so anything that's appearing red there while I've got that turned on, I'm just going to turn that off and turn it back on so everybody can see. You can see parts of the reflections in the buildings as well, overexposed now. So what I want to do is just slide my white slider back. I'm going to hold down Alt and click on the white slider, and you can see the parts of the image that are overexposed. Slide that back. Okay, so now we've basically got our black and white point set, our highlights and shadows opened up a little bit as compared to the beginning. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to, down in the left-hand side of the library window, just above the film strip, and I'm just going to collapse the film strip. There should be a little soft proofing icon there. What I want to do is just click YY. Now this will give a before and after view of these. So what we can see now, if I zoom in on parts of the bridge itself here, you can actually see the detail coming back out of the bridge. It's still not perfect, we can still do a lot with it, but you can actually see now from the underexposed part of the image that you're actually revealing detail back in the bridge. I'm just going to click off YY for a second here, just so that we've got our full screen view back. Click fit. All right, now that we've basically opened up our shadows and got our highlights and black and white points set, this is where I would then use the exposure slider. I don't want to make crazy big adjustments to it. I really just want to now open that up a little bit so we're revealing more detail in the image. Now this will tend to probably reduce contrast a little bit. You'll actually see little bits of washed out bits on the bridge here now. But if we go back again to our before and after view that we had before, we can now see much better detail throughout the image. Again, as I say, it's not perfect. There's still work to do on this image. But in terms of actually demonstrating, I guess, what exposure corrections can actually be done by shooting in RAW and by using Lightroom, by using the Adobe RAW processing engine, so much can be achieved when you're actually shooting. And I guess when something that I learned quite a long time ago is by learning how to post-process, it really gave me the ability then to reverse engineer my shooting process as well. Because once I knew what I could achieve with post-processing, I was then able to kind of know when I saw something on the back of the camera, whether I would be actually able to do something with that image still. So that's, really, I guess, kind of the basics, I guess, of what exposure adjustments can do. So I'm just going to go back. I'll just reset here. Now, what I will also demonstrate here very quickly. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can actually see, so I'm going to go underneath the navigator window. I'll just collapse that again so everybody can see where I'm looking. Below that, we've got a history panel. If you scroll down below the presets, so I'm just going to collapse the preset panel we've got our history panel here. Now we can step back through this edit at any stage and actually have a look at corrections. So for the second, what I'm just going to do, get full screen back. Now on the right hand side of the screen, below all of our exposure and adjustment, I'm just going to click reset for a second. So we go back to our original image with no settings in there. Remember, all of these settings are database references that are stored within our catalog file itself. Now over in the history, just click back one step and we can actually step back. So let's just start at the very beginning of the history. I'm going to go back to the start of the file and step through this one step at a time. So I've made an exposure adjustment just to demonstrate what exposure can do. Stepped back, or stepping through. Okay, I've reset my exposure. I'm then looking at black clipping, so I'm making sure that my black point is set to the point where it's not underexposed. Stepping through this all the way through to white clipping, shadow adjustments. So I'm starting to open up the detail within the darker areas of the image. Highlights, clipping, and then finally just finishing it off with exposure adjustments. Now I don't want to touch on color adjustments with this particular file. As I've said, I have posted this particular image to my Instagram account. What I would probably say is I have used Photoshop for this as well to actually get to an end result. So getting my color adjustments and those sort of things right with this particular file actually took quite a lot to get it to that point. But it really, I guess, shows you the ability or the capabilities of what raw processing does in terms of pulling out the detail within that file. So what I will do now, I guess, is just have a look to see if there's any questions that have been sent through. Actually, I've got quite a few here, so I'll just have a quick look. Hi, W5 Photography. How are you, mate? How's things? And Nalcos, no, sorry, the feed didn't drop off, not on my end anyway. Now, so Ian.Imrie over on Instagram. If you later move your files from laptop or external hard drive, can Lightroom keep track of that and find the files later? I guess, so we're just going to step back a little bit here in terms of answering this question. So if you later move files from your laptop to an external hard drive, can Lightroom keep track of that and find the files later? So yes and no. Typically what I do if I'm moving files around is I'll actually export files as a new catalog or as a catalog. So if I'm looking to export this particular set of files, I would export it as a catalog, export the files as a catalog, and then at a later date into a separate catalog, I would then file, import from another catalog, select the catalog that you're working with, and then import the selected images from that catalog. There's quite a few different things to think about there, Ian, in terms of moving your files around. if the original source of the files happens to go missing, you can locate them later. It's probably a little bit too difficult to demonstrate that here now, but you'll still see like a preview of that image, but typically you'll see another icon on top of the file down in your film strip, and you can actually right click on that and say to locate those files. There's a lot of things to think about in moving your images around. I tend to try not to do that. Obviously, if I do need to move images, or if I'm bulk moving images around, I generally tend to create a new catalog. One thing that I have had to do a lot in the past is when I'm traveling and doing workshops, I quite often have a catalog on my laptop, which I've captured during that workshop or that event or that trip. And then I'll have a main catalog file that has all of the, I guess, what I showed in the beginning of this workshop, all of the main files, my 81,000 files. So what I would then do on my laptop is actually export the files on my laptop as a catalog onto an external drive. I would then bring them in via importing from another catalog within Lightroom and actually import those files directly into the catalog. Hopefully that answers your question for you. There is quite a lot of things to think about there. There will still be references within your catalog file pointing to a particular file because that database reference will be there. You can then tell Lightroom where the new files are stored if you do happen to be moving them from one place to another. Just quick check to see any other questions here. No, not yet. Earl Blessing again. Yes, the canopy on the Melbourne image was annoying me too, which is why I removed it out of my original, my edited file. Unfortunately, I wish Melbourne City Council or Victoria Parks, I think, govern the land there, would remove that for us, but hey, unfortunately they won't. So let's move on to the next section now. I'll just give everybody a bit of a 30 seconds, I guess, to have a look and to maybe just get a drink or do whatever else you're doing, and we'll move on to the next part of the workshop, which will be processing a black and white edit and setting up presets. All right, so Adobe Lightroom has a lot of different profiles within it that kind of allow for different color types, different color sources, black and white editing, all sorts of different things. What I probably want to do more so in this image, rather than it being how to process a black and white image, it really is about kind of showing what contrast does in an image, how to achieve that. Again, this is all about exposure adjustments. Also showing some very basic localized adjustments within this particular image, and also creating presets. Now, presets, as I said before, are great ways to kind of edit files in bulk or to create a particular style of image. And this will also be the first time that we'll touch on outputting an image for use as well. Now, we're going to show different crops of this image to achieve different effects as well. This was an image that was captured somewhere along the road in east coast of Tasmania, near a little town called Pyangana. Icy, cold, crazy roads. Literally had to hit the brakes and slid on the ice to stop as I saw this tree heading along, as we do as photographers. You see things and it's just like, stop, got to get there. So yeah, this is I guess a really moody morning, cold, and the edit that I wanted to achieve with it straight away, I knew straight away, I really wanted to showcase, I guess, the moodiness and I guess the cold, damp of the scene. So let's flick back over to the display, and I will then go into our library and we will select the tree image. There's a few things about this image that I straight away don't like. There's a few distractions in here, which I think we will work with. First distraction, bottom left-hand corner. A few things we can do there. First and foremost, for the actual example image, which I'll just bring up over here on the screen. Okay, so we'll just have a quick look at this. So it's a black and white, the actual full screen version of this image. It is one of my favorite images that I've captured in black and white. Again, always looking for those, I guess, basic contrasty scenes. Just sorry for those who probably noticed that the screen dropped off there for a second as well. So yeah, the actual crop of this, I've cropped it into a 16:9 image, and I'll just bring up the full edit of it. So the full screen edit, we should be able to see. I've cropped it as a 16:9 image, removed a lot of distractions out of the scene. Really kind of, as I said, showcase the moodiness of the fog. Try to get some contrast in the scene. And yeah, definitely removed a few distractions out of it as well. So I'll just flick back to the display and we will be able to start editing. So let's have a look at this. All right. So as we step through this, so I've selected the image. I'll go up to my develop window, make sure that I'm not in split screen for the moment. So first things first, we can see within the histogram that there's a lot of information within the highlights. There's not much information in the shadows, not much information in the midtones. So within those particular areas of the image, I guess what we're looking for is contrast, is a good spread or a good difference between highlights and shadows. And at the moment, there's nothing within the shadows of this image. So that's what we're going to be looking to achieve, I guess, to really get the full impact of what a black and white image is going to do. So let's look at the settings of this image. Firstly, ISO 320, 70mm, f2.8, 1/500th of a second. So this was shot handheld. As I said, I was literally running, jumped out of a car to shoot. Just captured my eye as we were driving past, and had to slide on the road on the ice as we're going along the hill that this is actually on. So let's just, below the histogram itself, we've got a couple of options here, which are color. So I'm just going to collapse the panel that we're looking at here. All right, and below that, we've got color and black and white. I'm just going to click black and white for a second. Firstly, realistically, what black and white is a desaturated color image. Okay, now I'm not going to say that that's how you achieve a black and white image, because there is still an art form itself into getting contrast and getting that, the things that really make a black and white image impactful, which is the contrast between the whites and the blacks. I'm just going to switch back to color for a second. So you can click black and white. If I just desaturate the image as well, so underneath the presence window, just desaturate. You can actually see I've achieved the same look and feel to the image as what we have by clicking black and white. Okay. Within Lightroom, we have this new, well, relatively new, it's probably been there for the last few updates. Below treatment, we've got profile, Adobe monochrome. Next to that, there's 4 square boxes, so directly under the words black and white. Let's click on that. Click on, you've got all color B+W. So this is actually all of the different black and white profiles. I guess for anybody who's using, Instagram, any of those sort of things, you could kind of consider them as filters. They aren't, but What we can do though is really have a look at some preset options that kind of allow us to get the look and feel that we are trying to get from this image. Now, I won't use any of them. I'll just show the options that are here. Kind of allows different, I guess, different contrast variations, different values with filters, blue, green and yellow, and red and orange filters. I'll demonstrate, I guess, what can be done with that in a second in a different way. I'm just going to go scroll back up, click on all, click on close. So within that panel that we had with all of the filter or the profiles, just click on close. Okay, so I'm just going to leave black and white turned on. I guess that's the preset value. It's already desaturated the image for us. What I will do now is I'm just going to get our histogram looking a little bit better here. Firstly, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option. I'm just going to slide my black point down a little bit. I won't actually even hold down Alt or Option. I'll just slide it. And what we're looking to do, I guess I'm really looking at the area of the tree here. The tree itself is where I guess the shadows already are. So I'm really just looking to get more impact out of that. Okay. I'm just going to drop my shadows down a little bit as well. So we can already see from the beginning, I'm just going to go over to the left-hand side of the window. In my history, so below the navigator panel, I'll just very quickly collapse and decollapse that. Step back to convert to black and white. Stepping through some minor changes, black clipping, shadows. What we're doing there really is just looking to get a bit more contrast within, I guess, the tree in particular. I do like the blown out white. I probably don't like it blown out quite as much as that. So I'm just going to slide my highlights window back a little bit. Just want to get a little bit less within there, so it still kind of looks foggy, not like snow, I guess, would probably be the easiest way that I would explain this. I'm just going to drop my whites down a little bit as well. Just going to slide the white. So if we just, I'm just going to reset or just press X, Y and Y, just do a before and after. So probably not a fair comparison. One's color, one's black and white. But I guess in terms of what we're looking at here, really is a before and after of what has already been edited. So we've started with our color file and turned it to black and white, got our contrast slightly right. Just go back to full screen. So when we're doing a before and after, you can see on the left-hand side window, you can see where my mouse is hovering over now. That'll just cancel the full screen. Now, something to think about here within black and white images is that we're still modifying individual color channels. So while we are in black and white, we can still modify yellows, greens, reds, blues, magentas, all of those sort of things, and it'll actually have a particular impact on the image. Now, so in the basic panel, where I'm just collapsing, expanding at the moment, if I scroll down a little bit, below the tone curve panel, we've got a B+W. I'll just collapse and open it, a B+W window. Now within here, you can see it's called a black and white mix. Now I just want to demonstrate this. I'm just going to slide my greens up and down. Now I know the greens are the grass. You can actually see the grass itself darkening and brightening. Now basically what we're looking, within the black and white color mix, you are darkening and lightening those individual color channels from the color file. So I'm just going to, just for the moment, just get a little bit more contrast. Basically, I'm still trying to introduce a bit of contrast. As I slide the yellow channel down, you can actually see the histogram itself. So watch the histogram at the very top. You can actually see it changing. So we're introducing a bit more contrast within the image by changing the individual color channels. I'm just going to go with yellow and green. Now, quite often within Lightroom and Photoshop, yellow and green channels are very, very close together. So in terms of actually processing those, sometimes it's yellow, sometimes it's green. I'm just going to go with both of them for the moment. Okay. Now, if we slide any of the others, they're not going to have too much of an impact because the original file didn't have any blue in it, didn't have any purple in it, didn't have any magenta in it. It may have some red in it, but not a lot. So that's not going to have much impact. And orange, again, same thing, nothing in there. So if I go back to my before and after, you can see it's yellows or greens within the grass. And that's the only real colors that we're looking at here. But a quick little tip I can give. I'm just going to scroll back up. I won't touch on white balance with this particular file. But if we want to be able to potentially adjust individual regions of an image, my white balance is currently set at 5,850 on the temperature and on the tint plus 13. So that's how it came out of the camera. If I want to make heavier adjustments to an individual color channel, I can actually introduce those colors through white balance even more. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to slide my temperature across towards yellow. And then you'll see as I scroll down to the black and white color mix, I'm going to have a much bigger impact on different areas of the image. I'm just going to, yep, that's easy. So I'm just going to put more yellow into this image through the temp. I'm just going to slide, and you can see now I'm actually impacting a slightly bigger region of the image because I've introduced more yellow into the image through the white balance and temperature. So you can do the same with green. So if I want to go towards my green, you can see different areas of the image darkening now because I'm actually introducing green through the tint, and I've dropped the exposure of green down, and you can do that. So sometimes with black and white images, quite often with black and white images, if you want to have a bigger, I guess, impact on a particular color channel, you can introduce that as well via temperature and tint into different parts of the image. You can do it localized as well, but that's probably getting a little bit too complicated for this session. But so I just want to get it to the point now where I guess I'm happy with how it looks. And so at the moment, I've got temperature set 7622, tint set at plus 13. I've dropped my highlights down a little bit just to get a little bit more detail back into some of these areas, I guess more into the distance here. I've just more into the distant areas of the mountain. So more in these trees. So I'm kind of trying to bring out the detail in that section of the image back there, just a little bit more. All right, so I've got my black point set. That's more so just to get contrast back into the tree. I've again introduced a little bit more contrast into shadows. I've changed my black and white mix, so I've darkened the yellow and green channels, really just for the grass. Now I want to just flick back to the original image here that I brought up at the beginning, so I'll just bring that up here. Now I'll bring it up full screen, and you'll be able to see, I guess, a few other things that we'll be looking at. Okay, there we go, tree black and white. All right, sorry guys, the screen went black again. I chose the wrong source coming in. That's all right. We'll be there in a second. So you can see that with this particular image, the grass itself, I've added more detail into the grass. Kind of made it a little bit more, again, contrasty, a bit more clarity, a bit more detail within the grass itself. So I'm just going to flick back again to the actual edit. So one of the things we wanted to work on with this is showing how to put a localized adjustment in. Now, before I go too much further, to get this finished image, I know that I want a 16:9 crop. So let's go to the very top of the screen, and we're going to start looking at some localized adjustments here. So underneath the histogram, we've got a crop. So we've got crop, spot removal, red eye, gradient, radial tool, and brush. Okay, these are the tools, or the localized tools underneath. I'm just going to start with crop. So if I click crop, it should bring up a grid, a 9 grid, so 3x3. I know that I want this to be a 16:9 crop. Now, there's something about a 16:9 crop that I can probably say pretty quickly, and that is we actually get used to looking at a 16:9 crop. TV is a 16:9 crop, typically. So we generally tend to get used to it naturally by looking at it, and 16:9 crop tends to be my favorite crop. In this particular image, it also works really well because I'm getting rid of the element that's in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. I'm sorry, bottom left-hand corner of the screen. That's a problem. If I was doing this in Photoshop, this would be much easier to remove. Within Lightroom, it's not going to have the same impact by using a spot removal tool. So I'm just going to look at the crop here, in that I'm placing the tree itself onto a third. Okay, I'm using my rule of thirds. Again, it's a rule, or sorry, it's a guide. It's not a rule. But I am going to use that because I've got a really strong element within here. And so I'm basically trying to use a strong crop to really showcase placements of the objects within the scene as well. So I'm just going to crop that 16:9 and click done. Okay. Now, it hasn't quite gotten rid of all of the trees, all of the tree corner down the bottom, or on the bottom left-hand corner. So I'm just going to pull it in just a tiny little bit more and click done. Okay, so we now have a rule of thirds in terms of placement of the tree horizontally, but also placement of elements of the tree vertically as well. So I'm basically trying to really create that strong composition by using the thirds. Now, for here, I'm going to start firstly with a spot removal. Okay, so this is one of the localized adjustments. Now, I will say Photoshop does a far better job of doing this. Lightroom is great for some things, but it's certainly not going to be good for removing larger objects within the scene. So I'm just going to very quickly grab, so next to the crop tool underneath the histogram, I'm going to grab the heal. So I'm going to click on heal. Now, square brackets on either Mac or PC will shrink or increase the size of the brush. Now, the element that I want to remove from this scene at the moment is this stick that's annoying me. This little stick. So we've got a brush, heal, size. At the moment, I'm just going to decrease the size of it a little bit, so to about 30. Basically making the size of the brush just a tiny little bit bigger than the actual element. And basically I'm just going to brush over the stick. Okay, so you can see what it's actually doing effectively is duplicating another part of the image onto there. Lightroom typically does that. Not too bad of a job unless something is too big. But for this particular purpose, it's great. It's not such a major element in the image. So I've done that, and I'm just going to click enter or hit enter. Okay, and then click in the bottom left-hand or right-hand side of the screen. you should see a little done icon, and just click done, and that'll deselect that tool. So you can see now I've gotten rid of the stick. Very basic element. It's not too big, so it wasn't too hard to achieve. Now I'm going to try the same thing with this particular branch here as well. So I'm just going to zoom in here. You see this little branch? Now it may or may not do a good job of this. Depends on where it's going to clone from. Same thing again, spot removal. I'm just going to paint over that. Now I might just move the source a little bit so it's closer. Okay, just line it up so that it does a reasonably okay job. Okay, now I'm just going to go back into that, select it, and just drop the opacity of it down just a tiny little bit. So basically what I'm trying to do now is get that to blend in as much as I possibly can. And you can see now the stick's gone. Now it's not the best spot removal process. As I say, if I was going to be doing major elements, I'd definitely do it in Photoshop. But it does a good enough job for small elements within the scene. So if we go back a few steps, I'm just going to go back to our crop. You can see the sticks are there. Just going to go in our history panel, add spot removal to the very last step. And you can see the sticks are gone. Not too bad of a job. It'll do for this particular purpose. Now what I want to do here is I'm still lacking probably that detail that I want in the grass. Now the reason for this is because this particular image was shot at f2.8. So the aperture was really wide open. I was focusing on the tree, which means the fall off or drop off in focus in the foreground element of this particular image is quite high. So I'm just I want to basically introduce a gradient into the bottom of this image to create more detail and texture in the grass. So underneath the histogram, crop tool, spot removal, red eye, and gradient. So I'm going to get the gradient tool. Now if anybody out there has done a shooting workshop with me, any of the Nisi filters workshops that I've done all over the country, the gradient tool is effectively, think of it as a soft grad. We're basically introducing a gradient or an area of impact in the scene that typically represents a soft grad. So what I'm going to do, now you can do the gradient tools from the top or bottom. We want the detail to be in the bottom part of this image in the grass. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to, pretty important here, I'm going to click the gradient tool. In the navigator panel, there's a little icon that says fit. Just click that. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see what I'm collapsing and expanding. There's a little icon there that says fit. Let's just make sure that we're there. Now the reason being, we want to be able to work with the edge around the image. At the bottom of the image, I'm basically now with the gradient tool selected. So the gradient, now I'm just going to show this underneath the histogram, the fourth localized adjustment tool along. I'm just going to drag that up from the bottom of the screen. Now we can make adjustments to it. We can place it in different ways. I'm just going to drag that up, straighten it. We can twist it to actually have a different area of impact. Now what I will do here is I'm going to click Show Mask Overlay. As I said before, when I referred to a soft grad, the red at the moment is the area of impact, or the biggest area of impact. And you can see a transition appearing. So it's going to be heavier transition at the bottom and slowly and gradually work its way out of the scene so that it's not making any impact. I'm just going to line that up for the bottom, for the moment, basically halfway up the grass. I'm going to click Show Selected Mask Overlay Off so that the red overlay doesn't appear anymore. All right. And firstly, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add some texture. So in the right-hand side panel, I'm going to add some texture to it. I'm also going to add clarity, and I'm going to add some dehaze. Now what I'm really looking to do here now is just get as much detail into that grass, remembering it was shot at f2.8, so I would expect for a lack of detail in the foreground. I'm just going to adjust it again. Now I'm going to slide dehaze all the way across so you can kind of see the impact that it's having. What I'm doing effectively here at the moment is introducing as much localized contrast into that particular area as possible. Texture, clarity, and dehaze are all about contrast. They do it in different ways, but basically what we're looking to do is introduce contrast. Now, sharpening is contrast. So I guess another way to think about this is I'm trying to sharpen the grass. I'm trying to pull detail out of that. And sharpening is a process of introducing contrast as well. So I'm just going to click done for a second. Oh, actually, so with that gradient mask on, now underneath the adjustment tool, so I'm just going to click the words basic here on the right hand side. I'll expand and collapse that panel. Just above that, you can see the words close, reset, and then to the left of it, there's a little toggle switch. Now, if I toggle that switch on and off, you can see the changes that are happening within that particular tool. So from there, look kind of washed out of focus, no detail in the grass. If I click it on, we've sharpened the grass a little bit. We've introduced some contrast around. We've created edges effectively around different parts of the grass. It's probably a little bit too high. I'm just going to slide my dehaze back a little bit. Slide my texture back a little bit and the clarity back a little bit. Now, what I'm also going to do is I'm just going to drop the exposure just in that part of the scene. Now, the reason I'm doing that is, again, watch the histogram. We're trying to get a little bit more to the left within a particular part of the image. And what I've done there, again, is just probably introduced, again, I'm using the word contrast a lot. That's what black and white imagery is all about, really. It's just darkening that foreground a little bit, really, to kind of guide the light in a particular way. And I'm just going to click done. So I'm going to step back a little bit here now in the history panel, so over on the left-hand side. So I'm just going to scroll down to where we had add spot removal. So I'll just collapse and decollapse the panel that I'm working with again, so everyone can see. All right, now I'm just going to go back down to where we had spot removal, and then click on update exposure adjustment. And you can see we've guided the light through the scene here, and also just got better detail within the grass area, I guess. Now, what I'm going to do as well, so I'm just going to click on the gradient tool again. Click on, so there should be a little dot, if anybody's following along. There should be a little dot where the gradient selection is that we had before. Now, by clicking on the dots, we can go back through and re-edit that particular part or particular adjustment. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to turn up. I'll try with highlights first. Whites. And I'm going to drop shadows down. Again, all about introducing that contrast. While we've got the darkening, or I guess trying to add some depth into the actual tonal values or the tonal range within the foreground itself, just to kind of, again, help with that impact of the cold morning. Just frosty grass. We still had a little bit of brightness through there with the frost and everything that was appearing. It's not going to be the best shot at f2.8, but we'll work with what we've got. So I'm going to scroll back down to on the history panel, to add spot removal. And I'm going to just click on the top again so we can kind of see where we're at. Now I'm going to go just have a look at this in a before and after view. Just going to click before and after so we can actually have a look at what we've done. So you can see we've removed the sticks out of there. We've removed that wayward branch that was appearing there. I think we've still got a little bit of something there that we can remove. I'm just going to, I'll zoom in on that section so everyone can see. Just in underneath the tree here, there's still a little bit there. So I'm just going to get my spot removal tool and I'm just going to paint over there. Just hope it does the job. Click done. Cool. I don't like it. I will just do that again. Paint over it. Didn't like the part of the scene that it duplicated. Move it down a little bit closer. There we go. Cool. It's a little bit better. Okay, just going to zoom out. All right. So we've got basically now, in terms of what I was looking to achieve, I think still utilizing the effect of the fog, the cold morning, much more detail, clarity and texture within the grass down the bottom, a little bit more detail, I guess, in terms of that. And what I'm going to quickly do here now is I'm just going to scroll down on the right hand side panel and I'm going to go down to the section here that says sharpening. So underneath the detail, I'm just going to collapse and decollapse where I'm looking at on the screen. So as I scroll down, in the detail panel, we've got sharpening. Sharpening, radius, amount, radius, detail, and mask. Now, a couple of things. Firstly, as I've said before, sharpening is about introducing very small amounts of contrast to make different parts of the image really stand out, or at least look like they've got higher detail. What you're looking to do is create edges around high contrast areas of blacks, midtones, and whites. Okay, now it's a little bit complicated to understand it, but what I'm going to do here is I'll just quickly zoom in on the tree a little bit. Just zoom in there. Okay. Now I'm going to over-exaggerate this for a particular purpose. You can actually see the edges around the tree and the white, I guess the white background of the sky. Now if I just sharpen, I'm just going to slide sharpening all the way across. Now what we can see here now is in different tonal variations of the image between highlights all the way through to shadows, including everything in the midtones, what we've done is created edges around all of those different regions or parts of the image that contain those tonal values. Now, I'm just going to slide that back again. I'll do the same thing with detail. Detail increases exactly that, I guess, the level of detail contained within those areas of contrast, within those edges. So the two of those combined together, we're basically creating edges around everything that's either dark, midtones, or light, and separating them. Now, obviously this is not going to look good. I'm just going to zoom out. I can see it straight away there. You can see everywhere in this image now. It looks like it's grainy, looks like it's just been turned into a crunchy, I don't know, not good anyway. I'm just going to reset those. Now you can reset any values just by double clicking on the words, amount, radius, detail, masking. Radius is the size of the edges that we're creating around those high contrast areas. So when I slide sharpening across, you can see the edges here at the moment. Basically, we're working with 1 pixel edges. So the size of those actual sharpened areas are 1 pixel in size around each of the tonal variations. So if I go radius 3, which you probably never want to do, it's going to create these massive edges and halos around those really high contrast areas. Sorry, just give me a second. I just need some water. Got a bit of a sore throat at the moment. So I'll slide that across 3 pixels. You can see that looks terrible. I mean, that's really super crunchy, nothing there. There's edges everywhere around those. You can see very specifically around the whites and the blacks. It looks terrible. So when I'm sharpening, my typical rule, actually I can't think of too many other ways that I've ever done this, is I actually drop my radius down to 0.5 pixel. So I slide my radius down to 0.5. I want really small edges and really refined amounts of sharpening. I don't want crunchy edges. I don't want to introduce halos around those high contrast areas. I don't want to have visual signs really of just edges that aren't there to begin with. So I drop my radius down to 0.5. Okay, now sharpening I've got turned up to 150 here just so that everybody can see. I'm just going to reset that. Now you can see we're back to pretty much normal here. No sharpening has been introduced into this image. Before I actually introduce any sharpening though, so I've dropped my radius down, I want to create what's known as a mask. Okay, now the mask itself is going to select specific tonal values within this image that we want to create sharpening around. I don't want to create sharpening around the entire image. I don't want to be creating sharpening in areas of highlights that might be slightly similar to each other. I don't want to be creating sharpening within true 100% shadows. Basically, that's going to introduce noise into an image and it's going to actually degrade the quality of your image quite a lot. So with masking, I hold down Alt or Option on the Mac. I'm just going to slide that across, and what we'll see appearing here now is an actual mask that's being created that's creating the selections of the specific tones, specific regions of the area of the image that we're going to introduce this sharpening into. I only want to sharpen the grass and the tree. I don't want to sharpen the sky at all. I don't want to sharpen anything that's a complete deep shadow either. So I'm just going to go to about 70 on my masking slider. So basically you can see just the tree itself is going to be sharpened. I've dropped my radius down to 0.5. I'm just going to zoom in a bit on the tree itself so we can have a look and see what happens here. I'm going to increase my sharpening. Now I don't want to go too far here. I'm probably going to work with values underneath 75. You can already see at 75, even with a 0.5 pixel radius and a mask selected, edges are starting to appear around the tree itself, the insides of the tree, basically, yeah, just parts of the image that we really don't want it. So I'm just going to drop that back down to the point where we can barely see the edges actually being created around it. So just take it to the point where you can see it and slide it back. For this particular image, I'm working with, I guess, a 60. Yeah, I saw that there, so 60. All right, so that's pretty much where we're at, I guess, in terms of that. So I've sharpened this image to the point. Now I'm going to look at the foreground as well, just to make sure we haven't created too many edges around these little trees that are appearing here. Little tufts of grass, the little logs or the little sticks that are still in the grass. And I think that's pretty good. So in terms of the actual image itself, again, I'll go back to before and after. So we've started with a color image. We've created a black and white image. I'm just going to step back in terms of my history here to where we were. So we're at a spot removal. So I've cropped, go back. Okay, so highlights, so that's the full crop. We've then created the crop. We've then taken away the branches. We've then started to introduce the graduated filter into the bottom just to get that detail and guiding the light through the image. And then we've gotten to the point where we've got a sharpened image with all the contrast, everything added within the grass to help guide that through. The next step here really is just going to be to export this image now. I'm happy with the look and feel of the image. Histogram's reasonably okay. There's still quite a lot of information within the highlights. There's some big spikes there, but foggy morning, that's fine. I don't want to do too much else with that. So I'm going to export this image now. Now, a couple of things to think about here is what we're exporting this image for. Firstly, exporting the image for social media or online use. We're looking to export it in a particular way or a particular color profile. Exporting for print, we're looking to export the image as the highest detail possible with the most color still in it as possible. So knowing what you're using it for is actually going to be a key thing, I guess, in terms of defining what you're going to be doing with or how you're going to export it. I'm going to export this image firstly for Facebook, I guess, and then I'll export the image for something that's going to be for print as well. So next step here, if you just right click on the image, brings up your menu, you've got export and then export. Now I'm going to start with an export for Facebook here. Now I'm going to export, so we're exporting to a hard drive. A few steps down through here that we're looking at. I'll just turn off the options for my last export. So we're exporting to a specific folder. At the moment I'm exporting to the desktop. I'm just going to put it into a subfolder on the desktop called George's Exports. So scrolling down further, there's no other options that I really want to do here. File naming, this is really important. So just going to rename the file to a custom name. I'm just going to call this tree black and white. Okay. We don't use the video option. Below that, now this is a really important part, I guess, in terms of defining what the file is going to be used for. For this particular file, we're going to be looking at, it is a black and white file, so an Adobe RGB file would probably still be good for social media, but just to work with this, in the color space, I'm just going to turn it on to sRGB for the moment. Image format, we're going to leave it as a JPEG. Now the quality of the image, I'm going to leave it at 100. If you're going to use it for a website or any of those sort of things, you can decrease your file size by dropping your quality down. I tend to not do it so much. I want people to see the best version of my image possible, which isn't really a JPEG, but at the same time, for this purpose, it'll be fine. So I'm going to leave the quality at 100. Scrolling down, image sizing. I'm going to resize this. Now, there's a few options in resize. Width and height will actually change the aspect ratio of your image for you based on the values here. We don't want to do that. Below that, dimensions, again, same thing. Long edge. So on this image in particular, we're just going to be using the long edge to set the value. Now this won't change the aspect ratio of this image. So it'll still be a 16:9 image with the long edge being 2000 pixels wide. And then it will calculate the height of the image and still maintain the correct aspect ratio. So I'm just going to resize that to 2000 pixels. Just going to leave it at resolution 300 pixels per inch for the moment. It's just the default setting for mine. Output sharpening, I'm not going to sharpen. Now, the reason being, just for me, I tend to like to have control over my sharpening rather than using preset values within Lightroom. I go to the point of actually looking deep into the images, making sure there's no halo effects, making sure there's no artifacts being caused or aberrations happening throughout the image as you're exporting. So I'm just going to go export again, get back to here. I don't use output sharpening. Metadata. Now, metadata is important if you want to protect the copyright of your image, but something to think about is when you post something into social media, the metadata is going to be stripped out of it anyway. So this is great if you're publishing to web. Basically, all of the information that the camera is putting into that image as it creates the raw file is going to be stored within that, including copyright information, the camera that it's shot with, the lens that it's shot with, resolution, whether a flash went off or not, the date, all of those sort of things. Okay. Now, so scrolling down here a little bit more, watermarking. I don't use watermarks within Lightroom at all. I apply watermarks within Photoshop if I'm going to do it, but it is possible to do so within Lightroom. And post-processing, basically what this will do is it will open up the file that's been created into a secondary app. Now, again, if you want to add a watermark, that's great. That's probably an option to do here, but I don't do anything with post-processing. So for this file, I'm going to just go back to the settings again. George's Workshop. So specific folder, put in subfolder, George's Workshop, renaming it to Tree, black and white, sRGB, JPEG, 100% quality, resizing to fit, long edge, 2000 pixels, and I'm exporting. Okay, now I'll go over to my desktop, George's Workshop, and I have the outputted file, I guess, for use within social media purposes or within Facebook, for example. I've got a reasonably high enough resolution file for social media that's small enough, I guess, to be used online on the web as well. I'm just going to show you quickly, though, how I would export this for print. Okay. Now, I would probably most likely do this within Photoshop normally, but we'll just do this quickly. Export. Now, for print, I want to maintain in the color space Adobe RGB. I'm trying to keep the quality as high as possible. Same thing, specific folder, put in subfolder George's Workshop, Tree black and white. I'm just going to call it print. So custom name, Tree black and white print. Below that, file settings. I'm going to export it either as a PSD or a TIFF file. For this purpose, I'm going to export it as a TIFF file. I'm going to have no compression on it, a bit depth of 16 bits. So I want as much color information as possible, even though it's a black and white file, it doesn't matter. Below that, image sizing, turn resize to fit off. I don't want to resize this file in any way. So basically I'm exporting this to the same folder that I did before, George's Workshop. I'm exporting the file as its name. I'm exporting it as a TIFF file in the color space Adobe RGB with 16-bit color depth. 300 pixel per inch resolution, and I'm just going to export. Now, for this purpose, I'll just show you what we've actually done here. So those two exported files, we can now see here. We have a file that's a JPEG that is 846 kilobytes. We have a TIFF file that is 91.4 megabytes in size. So in terms of the two different file types there, I've exported a JPEG in sRGB color space, and it's 846 kilobytes, not much at all. But for print, the TIFF file is 91.4 megabytes, and it hasn't been resized at all. That's the file that I would take for print. The top one is the file that I would use for social media. Hopefully, got a little bit out of that. I mean, that's a black and white edit. We'll now just give myself a minute or two. I just need to get some water. I've got a pretty sore throat at the moment, so I need to just grab some water, and what we'll do then is we'll move on to the next edit, which is going to be the completed edit of the horsehead rock. I'll be back in 30 seconds. I just need to fill up a glass of water and fix my throat. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. All right, so we're going to step on now to a full edit of an image, and this is going to include color corrections, everything else. Now we are going to go a little bit over time here. That's okay. We'll get through this one. And so this is Horsehead Rock, one of my favorite locations in Australia. I shot this with a drone. I was down there with few mates, at least one of them who's following along right now, I know, on a trip, and put the drone up. It's not a national park down there, thankfully, so I put the drone up to get a slightly different view of Horsehead Rock, and had some filters on, some Nisi filters on the front of a Mavic, and captured some water crashing through a long exposure of this image. So you can see in the top image within this particular slide, there's quite a lot of a lack of contrast, I guess, within that image. That's probably the easiest way to explain it. You can see down the bottom we've got a lot more detail, a lot more contrast, a lot more color corrections. I'm going to work through this, do some very basic exposure adjustments. It won't take much to get this right. Show you how to do some white balance adjustments in a couple of different ways. Introducing clarity and texture again, particularly within the back of the horse here. So the horse is actually a rock formation that's out literally just off the side of off the shore. So I'll show you how that works, I guess. And then we're going to do some color corrections, basically, I guess, introduce saturation, vibrancy and luminance through the water. We're going to do some localized adjustment tools to introduce or to remove a few elements, said friends that were with me in particular, which are actually in the scene, in the original scene. I don't want them in there, so I'll get rid of them. But also, I guess, introducing directional light as well, which you can see in the top right-hand side of the bottom image here. I'm just going to bring up the full version of this image. So I'll just click this on. So you can actually see the raw file of the horse here is quite flat, I guess, as I say all the time, lacking a lot of contrast and detail. Raw files really are, think of it like film, you've got to do something with it afterwards. But then from there, what we can do is I'll just bring up the finished file again. This is probably one of my favorite images from back in that time. Not a lot of people at the time were flying drones, so I guess it was a slightly different aspect of this particular scene. I've used this several times for post-processing workshops. I've also posted this. It's up on my Instagram account as well if you head over and check that out. So you can see a lot more, I guess, just vibrancy, color, detail, particularly in the top and in the top left-hand side. This was shot right on sunset, so the light that was coming over the hill down there at Bermagui was actually just creating this beautiful light, and I really wanted to work with that as well within this particular image. So let's go back over and we'll start working with this image. So let's go back into Lightroom, into our library window. All right, I'm just going to zoom out and we're going to select the horse. So double click on the horse itself, So a couple of things that I really do like about this image, again, is the long exposure effect. You can actually see, so we'll just have a look at the settings of this image. So underneath the histogram, I'll just open and expand that particular part of the window. So underneath the histogram, I've shot this at ISO 100. It's shot with a fixed focal length of the Mavic, f2.2, and shot at 1/5 of a second. Now, I particularly was aiming to capture that water motion and the crashing around the rock itself. So that's something that I really want to work with within this scene. In the top right hand or top left hand corner, you can see the actual light that's coming through over the cliff face. Again, I really want to work with that. There's a few things. I'll just zoom in here. You can actually see the friends that I was with on that particular trip. Hi Earl again, if you're still watching, mate. There you are. I'm going to get rid of you, sorry. But you're going to be gone. Now, a few other little elements that I'll probably just have a play with and remove here as well. But something that's really important, I guess, with this image is also working with the detail on the back of this rock. We can introduce a lot more detail and clarity and sharpness, I guess, within the rock itself, within the horse. So let's start, I guess, with our develop panel. So click on develop. All right. Now, the order of the tools in here within the develop panel are not the order that I tend to work with. So we've got white balance at the top, and we've got contrast, highlights, and presence, detail, color down the bottom. White balance is typically something that I look at after I get my exposure right. Now, I said it earlier in the broadcast, and again, anybody who knows me out there probably knows that I am colorblind. So being colorblind doesn't really help sometimes with processing. So what I tend to do is I actually get the detail and the exposure correct on the image so that I'm seeing every part of the scene correctly first. I get the tonal contrast right, and then I work with white balance. Okay, and I'll show you a couple of ways to set white balance in a second. But firstly, look at the histogram. We've got a lack of detail within the shadows. So the left-hand side of the histogram, there's no detail in there. And particularly around, say, the base of the rock here, this particular part of the scene is where I'm looking to introduce shadows. So I'm just going to start firstly by just dropping my blacks down. Now, I'm not going to worry about holding down, I will, but if you hold down Alt and Option, you can see it's just going to be white because I'm not going to drop it down that far. So I've just dropped my black point down. You can see the bottom end of the histogram here started to get just pushed down a little bit. Just going to drop my shadows down a little bit more. Now I don't want to touch the bottom end of the histogram here, okay? So I don't want anything appearing if I click the arrow in the top left-hand corner of the histogram on. Okay, now next step, I'm just going to quickly show you what the contrast slider does. Now imagine with the contrast slider, just holding your finger down in the middle of the histogram and pushing it down. That's probably the easiest way to explain this. I'm just going to slide the contrast slider from side to side, and you can see from the middle of the histogram, it's just spreading either way. I'm just going to reset it back to 0. I'm just going to very, very lightly just kind of push that out to say +7 for the moment. All right. Now, from here, this is, so setting our white balance. Now, most people would probably shoot in auto white balance. If you're shooting in RAW, it's always easy to correct it later, which is great. But what I want to do here with white balance now is I'll show you a couple of different ways to actually set this. One is by eye. So I can slide the sliders around and just kind of hope for the best, which quite often is actually the best way to get the result that you're looking for. Temperature, typically you call this cooling it down. Sliding to the right, you call it warming it up. Okay. Tint, we're adding magenta or adding green. Now, green is my worst enemy. I have a habit of turning skies green by introducing too much tint to it, so I will not be using that one today. But what I will do And I'm just going to slide the temperature a little bit to the right. Really what I'm looking to do, this particular area of New South Wales is known as the Sapphire Coast. So the actual water itself, if you've ever been there before, and if you're looking into the water, you'll actually see that it's a beautiful sapphire colour. So I'm really kind of, it's a slightly warmer blue, I guess, is where I'm trying to get my white balance set for the moment. I'm just going to add a tiny bit of magenta and not too much. Actually, I'm going to remove it because it's warming the water up a little bit. Now I think based on the beginning and end, I'm just going to click before and after. Now you can already see, particularly so with the water, a little bit more, I guess, kind of closer to a sapphire blue, and in the top right left-hand corner of the screen, you can also see the warmth coming in across the light rays that are in the top. So that's one way to set white balance. Okay, so I guess just by eye I've done that, but there is actually another way to do this. I know with this image it's not going to get the best result, but what I will do is I'll do it anyway. I'm just going to reset the values on my white balance by double clicking on the words temperature and tint. Sorry, I just need some more water here again. My throat's starting to get quite dry. Alright, so what I'm going to do within the white balance tool is there's a little eyedropper that appears diagonally up from the word temperature, or the temperature. I'm just going to select that. Now hopefully everyone can see this well enough. What I'm looking to do here is, so white balance really is the meeting point where red, green and blue channels meet up together. Now your white balance can be set in numerous ways. What I'm looking to do here is looking for a neutral value that's as close to 50-50-50 as possible. So red, green and blue, or I'm looking for 90-90-90 or close enough in those values. So I'm just going to kind of hover around, I guess, at the moment, around the areas which are neutral, which are whites or greys. And I'm looking for a point in the image where it's going to be 90-90-90 or close enough. There can be a few percentage out. It's not dramatic. If you can get 50-50-50, that's great as well. So I might even just look for that on the back of the horse here somewhere. Cool. So I've just selected a point where 50-50-50 was, or it was close enough. It was really, we're looking at 53s, yeah, not too bad. There's probably not any pure greys in this image, but I'm just going to set the white point. Cool. I'm just going to undo that. So really, before we go too much further, so the current temperature, 6750 plus 22, okay? I'm just going to step back in my history here. Contrast. So before I started touching temperature, we started at 5950 for temp and tint plus 14. I did the temperature and tint by eye, and I achieved a value, or I set it at a value of 6308 for temp and tint at plus 14. I reset the temperature then, and when I selected a point in the image that was the temperature set by looking for the RGB values, I've achieved a white balance of 6750 and plus 22. So in terms of what I've done by eye and what I guess, a close enough white balance by picking a neutral target is, they're reasonably close to each other. We can go back through and edit these again later, but for now I'm just going to leave it there. So temperature 6750 and tint plus 22. All right, so I've done in reverse order of the tools. I've done exposure, I've then done white balance. Now we're going to step down below that, and we're going to do presence. So we're going to work with the presence. So presence really is detail and color saturation. Now I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here. The first thing we're going to look at is clarity. Okay, now I'm just going to, what I really am looking at is the horse, the ridges and the rocks and all the detail that's actually in the back of this horse. I really want to kind of bring that out and make it stand out a little bit more. I'm just going to slide the clarity up a little bit. Now I'm going to slide it up to +100. Now, when we were all editing back in 2013, 2014, this was the thing to do, I guess. HDR, I don't know why, but for some reason HDR had a spot and a place. This is a different, I guess, HDR in true sense is tonal range. HDR back in the day was all about crunchy elements within scenes. But so clarity for me, I'm just going to kind of slide that up no more than about 15 for the moment. I'm just going to zoom in on the back of the horse, and so we can actually see what it's doing. So I'll just reverse that and go +15 on the back of the horse. And you can see all the detail appearing in there. You can see some slight edges around it. For this particular image though, I don't mind it. It's not too bad. We're not introducing too much sharpness throughout it. So that's cool. All right, now texture, I'm just going to slide this over and we just have a look at this. So it's kind of introducing, now you can see a slight shift in white balance appearing. You can see the blue, so red, green and blue channels here as well happening. So a very slight shift in color. You can see a bit of saturation and vibrance going into the water. I really don't like that impact, so I'm just going to leave the texture down. I think it takes away, in this particular image, away from the long exposure effect that I've got, the nice silky smooth water. I guess the techniques of shooting with a drone from the air to actually get long exposures, kind of taken away from that. Dehaze, okay, just watch the histogram here as well. So there's two things you're going to notice here. One is the histogram is going to spread, we're going to get a lot of contrast, but also watch the peaks and troughs of the colors. So the red, green and blue channels, watch them spread as well. So we're actually changing, I guess, the white balance effects of the image as well. We're impacting on the color channels. We're doing all sorts of things. So we have to be really, really careful with dehaze. Dehaze I tend to apply locally rather than globally. I'm not going to use it here for the moment. I might use it in a part of the image afterwards. Now, vibrance and saturation, two tools that you've got to be extremely careful with. So vibrance, we're basically increasing the intensity of the color without changing the hue of the color. Saturation, we're increasing the intensity of a color, but it does change the hue. So let's have a look at what saturation does. You can see all sorts of funny things happening here. You can see terrible up in the corner, all sorts of stuff happening with the blues. It's just not right. So that doesn't work for this image. We might be able to kind of adjust it a bit later, but I think rather than adjusting it globally, I'm going to adjust it via localized channels afterwards. Vibrance, I do want to get a bit more punch into some of the colors, particularly around in the top left-hand corner of the screen. I'm just going to increase the vibrance a little bit. Just gets a little bit more color depth into the image. Now, I'll do a before and after so everyone can kind of see where we're at. Again, color contrast is starting to come in thanks to vibrance. We've got our exposure correct across the image. We've got more detail in the back of the horse head itself. So you can see the softness on the before image and the sharpness that's appearing. You can see the detail in the plants on the back of the horse. The ridge, the mane of the horse, I guess you could probably say. And you can also see a little bit more texture detail coming in the water, in the splashes themselves. I don't want to impact the texture too much across the rest of the water. I'm going to just turn off the before and after. I'm going to scroll down here a little bit. Now we're going to start playing with the color channels, hue, saturation, luminance. I probably won't do too much with the hue. Again, as I've said a couple of times, I'm colorblind. Hue changes to me some of the worst changes to have. I do use them a lot. I think it's probably best though that I don't demonstrate that, just in case I do happen to turn the sun rays green when they shouldn't be. or the purple, or the water purple or something. So, but I am going to change the luminance and the saturation. Okay, a couple of ways that we can do this. One, we can just adjust the individual colors. Okay, you can see as I slide yellow over, the top left-hand corner of the screen starts to really get a lot more punch or color punch in it. I'm just going to double click on the values of the yellow though, just to change that for a second and show you something different here. Quite often the pixels and the colors themselves are mixes of colors. They're not just an individual color. So the way to actually change regions and areas of the image, rather than adjusting via the single color channel, what we want to do is pick the dropper tool. So I'm just going to click this little circle. So each area here, I'll just focus on saturation only rather than, so you can change this rather than all, I'm just going to have it on saturation. So this little circle tool that's in the top left-hand corner of the panel, what I want to do then, take that into the top left-hand corner of the screen. I'm going to hold down, click down, and slide up. Now watch what happens to the saturation sliders that are on the right-hand side. You're actually changing oranges and yellows. It's not just yellows that are changing. And that's something to think about here when you are changing individual regions of an image through saturation or luminance or hues. Quite often it's actually a combination of colors that are being changed. Again, confusing for me. So I tend to use the dropper tool rather than using the individual channels, unless I specifically want to, or know that I want to change a very specific color channel. I'm going to just have a quick look at the blues here as well. So again, I could change them individually. You can see though, we're getting all sorts of funny colors and changes up in the top corner. So what I'm going to do, a lot of this color is actually going to be in the aqua. So what I'll do is I'll select the dropper tool again, or the selection tool, go into the image. I'm just going to add just a tiny little bit, and you can see it's aqua and blue that's changing. Okay, now if I now go before and after on this image, we should see a little bit more color depth through the blues, much closer to a sapphire blue now. Top left hand, well, I believe it's much closer to a sapphire blue, I'm sure. I'm going to say it is anyway, no matter what. In the top left hand corner of the screen, we can then see much more, I guess, vibrancy in the directional light that's appearing up here as well. So we zoom in, we've got much better color in the water, much more detail in the back of the horse, and better color in the top left-hand corner. They're probably the three areas of the image, I guess, that are really important for this at the moment. Now let's have a look at luminance. So within our HSL tool, hue, saturation, and luminance, we've got an all or luminance. I'm just going to click on luminance. Okay, now luminance changes the brightness of the color. So it changes the tonal range of the color to either be darker or lighter. So if I brighten my blues, you can see the water becomes washed out, but also look at the histogram. We're actually introducing more brightness as well, more, I guess, highlights into the image by pushing the blues brighter. It's also starting to impact areas of the image like the whites that have got a slight blue tint to them as well. So that's something to think about. I'm just going to go full screen. What I want to do, I'm just going to grab the dropper tool. I'm going to darken the water just a tiny little bit rather than brightening it. What I'm doing is bringing the detail back into the white parts of the image as well. So the highlights of the image, where the actual water flow is, where the I guess the texture, the splashes, all of those, and just making sure that we're maintaining the detail in there. If I brighten it, it starts to blow out. It just doesn't look right. It doesn't look right in the splashes around the horse. It doesn't look right anywhere. So I just want to darken it just a tiny little bit, and I'm just going to make minor adjustments within the slider panel. I'm just going to click over into the luminance. I'm just going to make minor adjustments in here just to get it to the point where I'm happy with it. I don't want to make it too dark. I don't want to make the white part of the water too dark either. I don't want to change the colors too much on it because I actually quite like the way the colors are before and after. If we have a look around the actual rock itself, it's looking good. So in terms of global adjustments on that image now, I'm pretty happy. So I've got my exposure set right. I've got my white balance set right. I've got my detail set right. Overall vibrancy, global vibrancy, hue, luminance are all set. Oh, sorry, saturation and luminance are all set. And yeah, I've got, I guess, I'm happy with the overall look and feel. But there's still things within this image that I want to change. Firstly, I want to soften the light up in the top left-hand corner. Actually, I'll do that last. I want to remove, firstly, the people that are polluting my image down here. Inconsiderate friends standing in my image while I was trying to take a shot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of the localized adjustment tools. I'm just going to zoom out here, click fit. I'm going to use the spot removal tool again, the same as we did over in the black and white image. Now with this image, it should be pretty okay. There's going to be a lot of areas here that we'll be able to duplicate into this because these are quite small spots as well. I'm just going to paint over friend number 1. Okay, click done. I'm going to paint over friend number 2 and the rock that's there as well. Now it's selected an area of the image that I don't want to be duplicating from. Just going to move that up a little bit. Okay, zoom in there, just using Command minus and Command plus to zoom in on the area of the image, and friends are gone. So I'll just take it back here, friends there, friends gone. I like it much better like this. All right. Next step, I'm going to be looking at this top left-hand corner. There's, I guess, a lot of techniques that are used to soften light. I don't want to just soften it. I also want to intensify this light that's coming through over in the top left-hand corner of the screen. I guess the way that I'm going to do this is I'm actually going to reduce the contrast in there. So remembering, I've said it quite a few times, that contrast is sharpness. Sharpness is contrast. I want to reduce the sharpness in the top left-hand corner of the screen so that the light itself is softer, so that area of the screen is softer. So I'm going to use a new tool that we haven't touched on yet. So below the histogram, we've got crop, spot removal, red eye, gradient, and radial brush. Okay. Now the radial brush basically allows us to draw a circle or an oval anywhere in the screen. You can change the size of it as you're going, as you're working, and adjust a particular part of the scene. Now I'm just going to delete that one for a second. I'm just going to draw the radial brush into the top left-hand corner of the screen. Now, a couple of things here. We've got invert. So underneath the histogram, in the adjustments, you've got invert. I just want to check, make sure. So at the moment, if I've got invert turned on, I'm impacting the inside of the circle. If I turn invert off, I'm impacting outside the circle. Okay. What I want to do is I want to actually impact the inside of the circle here. So I'm just going to click invert on. I just want to make sure I'm going to click down in the bottom left, show selected mask overlay so that the red is showing, just to make sure of what I'm impacting on. Now what I want to do is decrease the clarity in that particular part of the image. And I might need to make some adjustments to the radial brush itself, just to get that direction I don't want to be impacting on the sand too much, although the light is leaking, I guess, over the hill a little bit. So I just want to decrease the clarity in that particular part of the image. I'm just going to zoom in up there in that top corner. I decrease the clarity all the way. You can see we've lost all detail out of the trees. It doesn't look natural. So I'm just going to decrease it enough, I guess, that the light itself is just nice and soft, rather than being a harsh, hard light that's coming over there. I'm just going to get this right, get my radial brush right. Now, I'm also going to introduce some warmth into there as well. Now, I'm only focused on that part of the image, but I'll just zoom out a little bit. I'm going to change the temperature of that particular part of the image as well. I'm just going to introduce some more warmth coming over the top of that mountain. You can see now, I guess, that I've really exaggerated. I'll just turn that on and off. So I'll click the radial mask, the toggle switch again, as we had earlier, turn it on and off. Just introduce that softness of the light, I guess, and really trying to work with the direction of light that's coming in across here. I would have loved for it to have been more light coming in, actually maybe touching the horse itself, but I'm just working with what's there. So I've decreased the clarity just to soften it, which is basically removing contrast, unsharpening it, and then I'm warming the light up via the temperature. And I'll click done. So in terms of the overall image, that's pretty much where I wouldn't want to go too much further on that. I think still trying to maintain the color within the water and not saturate it too much, not make it too vibrant, not try to do too much else with the image in terms of too much more detail or too much more sharpness, just doing some minor and very simple adjustments there. But what I will do, just one more thing, is I'm going to introduce a gradient from the bottom right hand corner up to the horse. Just again, I want to really kind of guide the viewer's eyes into the center here. Now we can do this in a couple of ways. I'm just going to change the exposure just a tiny little bit, just subtle in the bottom left hand or right hand corner of the screen. So if I toggle that on and off, it's just enough there really, I guess, that takes away from making your eyes search through the brighter part of the image. Click done. And then one last thing I'll do, just going to introduce a radial mask. So again, radial mask, the same tool that we introduced into the top left hand corner of the screen. I'm just going to offset it slightly to the horse. I don't want to be impacting too much on that. Now remember that the horse itself really is the focal point of this image. I'm just going to drop now make sure invert is turned off this time. So if I go show select a mask overlay, we want to be impacting the outside. Just going to drop the exposure down a little bit. Basically what I've effectively done there is introduced a vignette into the image. It's very subtle. If you notice the darkening of the edges around it, it means you've gone too far. A vignette really is just about pushing your eyes through naturally into a part of the image that you want the viewer's eyes to be on. And I want it to be on the horse. I mean, that's the focal point of the horse. I do want everything else to kind of have a great impact, but really I just want the horse itself to be the focal point. I'm just going to drop the exposure down 0.13. And that's it, I think. So in terms of exposure and color adjustments, that's it. Next step for me now will be looking at sharpening. So sharpening is generally the last thing that I do before outputting the image. So I'm just going to very, very quickly again do what I did before. I don't want this to be too much of a demo of sharpening. I'm going to drop my radius down to 0.5. Sorry, just need some water again. Okay, now I'm going to hold down Alt and Option, slide my masking across, this time I'm going to push it even further than I did before. I only went to plus 70 on the black and white image. This time I'm going to go to plus 85 in the mask. I really just want it to be the horse as much as possible. Slightly around the edges of the brighter parts of the water, but it's all about the horse. I'm then going to zoom in a little bit, just so that I make sure I get this right. I'm going to slide the sharpening across. I don't want to go too far. Let's go all the way, but you can see the edge appearing at 150. Slide it back. Still see an edge at 74. I'm just going to go about plus 50, not too much. And push the detail a little bit so that the inside areas of the edges we've just created through the sharpness just get a little bit more impact. Okay, I'm just going to go before and after here. So I'll just zoom out first so everyone can see what I've done there. Let's go before and after view. Zoom in on the back of the horse. And you can see just more detail there really, and that's kind of just allowing that the texture in the rocks that I guess this particular part of the coastline or this particular location is really well known for. And we've also just introduced a bit more detail into the areas where the splashes are appearing as well. Okay. And that's pretty much it, I guess, for the Horsehead Rock image. So I'm going to output this again. I'll demonstrate for the two different purposes that we will have typically. And so I'll start with a social media edit. I'm going to do this in two different versions. Firstly, I guess the version of the image that I first created for social media, which is Instagram's really well known, I guess, for being better for taller images, so the 4x5 or 8x10 crop. So I'm going to do that first. So we'll create an 8x10 crop for Instagram. We'll then create a full crop for Facebook, and then we'll create a crop or a version for print as well. So let's just start with an Instagram crop. So I'm just a couple of little tips that I've learned here as well. So when we click the crop tool and we go to original, if you're selecting 4x5 or an 8x10 crop, it's going to crop it with the longest side still at the correct aspect ratio. So if I click 4x5 right now, it's actually going to crop the bottom and the top off the image, which is not what I want. Okay, so I'll just do that. Oh, sorry, side by side. Well, that's just made a fool out of me. No, that's cool. All right. Cool. Good. So I'm just going to drag these in, the sides in first, and then crop to a 4x5 aspect. Okay, so I'll just repeat that again of what I've done. So crop, drag the sides in, and then select 4x5, 8x10. Now I want to center the horse. There's a couple of things here though, I guess, that is a problem in terms of the overall edit that we've done. And that is that we've taken away the impact of the hill, or the light that's coming over the hill. We've also taken away the impact of the vignette that we've done. So a couple of things I'm going to do here quickly just to get this right. I'm just going to create another radial brush. I'm just going to warm up more of that mountain. Invert it so it's only the mountain, not the whole image. Just so we still maintain the feel of that light coming over the top. And I'm also going to just slide down a little bit and introduce the post-crop vignette. Now, because we've changed the entire crop and aspect ratio after we've added all of the different tools, we just need to make those modifications slightly as well. I'm just going to quickly click the radial brush and increase the exposure of that light as well, So we're actually getting more punch out of the light. So now what we've got is an Instagram crop of that image. So let's just go and have a quick little look. Now, for Instagram, over the years I've been using Instagram, I always export for Instagram as a PNG file. Now, it's only been very recently that Instagram itself, Lightroom has allowed us to export as a PNG file. In the past, I've always done my Instagram crops and exports via Photoshop. Let me just start here. So I'll have a look at my export. We can now do it in here. I'm just going to go specific folder, put into folder George's Workshop, custom name, Horsehead Rock, IG, scrolling down, image format. I'm going to change it to PNG. Now, I guess for me, if you start with a compressed file and then go and compress it even more in the platform, so to a certain extent, you don't want to be posting a 100 meg file into Instagram. It's just not going to do anything. But for me, I'm going to just do it as a PNG, which is a lossless file format. Color space RGB, bit depth 16 bits. I'm going to resize my image on the short edge to be 2000 pixels wide. So for Instagram, PNG file, sRGB, short edge, 2000 pixels, and do an export. Okay, let's go over to my desktop now, and we can open up the file. Okay, file size, 26.7 meg, is probably way too big. So within Lightroom itself, the file size of 26.7 meg is too big. So let's just go back over to Lightroom and let's redo this. File, export, PNG. I'm just going to drop this down, the resolution down to 150 pixels per inch. And I'm just going to drop the bit depth down to 8. And we'll just see the difference in the file size here. Export, use unique name. Okay, that's much better. So we've got two files, the second export that I did there, and the first export that I did side by side. To the eye, on the screen, there's not much difference. I would post the one on the right now to Instagram. That's a 9 megabyte file. A PNG in a crop that's 2000 pixels wide, an 8x10 crop. So that's going to give you the perfect aspect ratio for Instagram. Let's go back over to our edit. Now, a couple of things. I want to step back now. Now I'm just going to press Command Z here to undo because we cropped the image. I'm just going to press Command Z a few times so we go backwards to the point where we're not cropped anymore. Now you could step back via the history tool. I just want to make sure that we're doing this right. Okay, so we're back with the crop, with the last step being sharpen detail in our history panel over on the left hand side. So I'm just going to export this now for Facebook. Export again. Now the long edge is the top this time. I'm just going to rename this file to be Horsehead Rock FB for Facebook. I'm going to produce an image format of a JPEG. Now, something to think about here. With Facebook, it's easier to pull out an image that's a higher resolution. When you post to Facebook, it's much easier to save the files. So for me, I tend to always make sure that I reduce the resolution of an image a little bit. So 2000 pixels wide is probably the highest that I ever go. I know some people do reduce the quality. I said before I don't. I know some people do reduce the quality on Facebook just to make sure that people can't strip it down and then print. But for me, I'm just going to leave it at 100% for the moment. JPEG, sRGB, resize to fit long edge, saving it into George's workshop. I've renamed it to be Horsehead Rock FB to JPEG, and we're going to export. We now have Facebook file. We now have an Instagram file. So in terms of different outputs, one file, two different crops, different purposes, two social media platforms that are owned by one company, but hey, the image on the left, so the tall image, is probably more likely to get bigger engagement just because of the crop. It fills the full screen on Instagram as compared to the one on the right. Again, it's just my personal preference to post in 8x10, and this image works really well for it. Now I'm just going to export this now for print as well, just so everybody can see it repeated. So File, Export. Okay, desktop, put in subfolder George's Workshop, custom name, Horsehead Rock, print. Image format, TIFF, Adobe RGB, no compression, 16-bit depth, remembering we want the best quality file we possibly can to hand off to a printing company. No resizing of this image. I'm going to go back up to 300 DPI, 300 PPI, which is what I had it set by default. So exporting to subfolder George's Workshop, rename to custom name Horsehead Rock print, image format TIFF, color space Adobe RGB, bit depth 16, image sizing, no resizing, and export. And we'll have a look at the size of that file. Okay, so Horsehead Rock print, we can see here is a 71.7 megabyte file. So it's going to be much better in terms of the amount of detail in that image with no compression, lossless file type, in the right color space, Adobe RGB, which is going to be better for printing than sRGB, which is better for online use. So the first two files, that's sRGB color space. That's Adobe RGB color space. Now you're probably not going to notice too much difference via an online stream. I'm certainly not going to notice too much difference either really looking at the screen at this point in time, but you would definitely notice the difference when it comes to actually printing this image out. You want the color depth to be there as much as possible. So it's very important when you're exporting for print to export with Adobe RGB, TIFF file, largest file possible, no compression. So yeah, those settings. Now, that's pretty much, I guess that's it in terms of the complete edit. But what I do want to do, because I just realized before that I didn't touch on it with the black and white edit, is to show very quickly how to create a preset. It'll be the last thing we do. If anybody wants to send in some questions, I've got a few here that I will answer at the end that I'll address. So let's just go back to this tree here. There's a couple of things to think about here. I'm just going to click develop. Now, looking at presets, as I was saying earlier, it's all about creating a custom look and feel that can be applied multiple times across different images. So within the presets here, or on the, so in our develop panel, on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got a presets drop-down. There's certain things here, I guess, that over the time I've had different clients that have wanted different looks and feels. So what I'm going to do here is just create a preset for the black and white edit. So on preset, click plus, click create preset. Now I'm just going to call this tree black and white for the moment. Now all of the different settings that we made earlier when we changed this, when we were changing shadows, highlights, contrast, exposure, color, red and white, black and white mixes, all of those sort of things, These are all things and settings that we can save within this preset. Now the preset itself will then contain all of the values. So for example, you can see over here on the right hand side of the screen, black and white mix. Yellow -15, green -23. Now what I'll just do here very quickly, I want to include everything basically that we've done in this particular preset. So I'm just going to turn it all on. So we've got settings, treatment and profile, white balance, basic tone, tone curves, everything in here. I guess that's really a setting. So I'm just going to create that. Now on the left hand side screen, we have a new preset called Tree Black and White. Okay, now what I'll do here, just to demonstrate the use of this, I'm just going to reset the values of the actual edit, and I'm just going to click on, so we're back to the start with the color. I'm just going to click on the Tree Black and White. And you can see it automatically gets created. Now there's a couple of things that we haven't done though. Is I didn't include the crop within that setting. So what I'll do here is I'll just go create a preset, Tree Black and White 2. Actually, crop's not in there for some reason. No, crop is not in there, so we can't do that. So forget that. Crop used to be part of the presets, but now it's not. Okay, so just reset that. Back to the tree, and you can see once we click Tree Black and White, it'll just apply all of those values to there. Now you can apply that setting to any image you like. Obviously it's going to be beneficial to some images and not to others. So I'll go to the Melbourne image that we've got, click Tree Black and White. It's certainly not going to work on that image. You have to choose the style of image that you're looking at, but I guess that's a basic demonstration of what presets are. Again, I don't use them a lot, but they may be beneficial to some people and to not. So, all right, I'll just have a quick look now at any questions that have been sent through, and all right, so Nalkas or Jeff Bird. So why is classic Lightroom better for training? Is it better? Okay, firstly, classic Lightroom has far more options in it than Lightroom CC. Lightroom CC is based on cloud-based storage. So all of your files are basically stored online or on the can be on a local device, but really it's all about cloud storage and being able to use it across multiple devices, iPad, iPhone, Android device, computer, everything. So think of it as basically a web browser based editing tool, if you like, is probably the easiest way. Lightroom Classic, the desktop version, is much better for long-term cataloging. You don't have to worry about cloud storage. You can store everything locally on your devices, on your hard drives. You can still do edits through Lightroom CC as well, but I just find over time Lightroom Classic is just so much better, more powerful, just a better option overall for long-term cataloging and file storage. Okay, Mark Clohesi, so at Mark Clohesi, hey Jason, have just been doing the live stream and have realised that I have got the incorrect Lightroom. You said the stream will get put on look as